Well, welcome and happy Tuesday, everyone. Josh's Severe Weather. I'm a meteorologist in the Raleigh, North Carolina area, and I appreciate you joining me today. Those of you that are frequent visitors and viewers, thanks for being patient with me. It's a very busy time of year. I was on the road for a few days over the weekend, but we're back here. We've got weather to talk about, active weather for the rest of the year into January. And this video is going to uncover when the next real chance for a major system is going to be and who's going to be affected and what the holidays are looking like, and even beyond into January, as we see a lot of back and forth. So we're going to share our screen here and show you what's going on first today. Look how mild it is. It is the middle of December. We're talking 85 degrees in Sarasota, 84 in Corpus Christi. There is cold air. It's lurking, starting to make its way into the north central states here, but that is limited for the time being. Now, that's going to change. You see these temperatures here in the 40s and 50s in New England. That is going to be heading downhill here as we get to the end of the week. 60s and 70s down south, even 71 where I am here in Raleigh. It is going to be turning colder. So we do have big changes coming. And I'm going to break down what that looks like here in this video. So here's a look at the water vapor image from Tropical Tidbits. And you can see we do have a system here that is bringing some colder air down with it from Western Canada. But we also have a lot of moisture hitting the northwest here, a bit of an atmospheric river crossing the eastern Pacific. This is sending moisture into the northwest and will send winter weather into the interior of the northwest over the next couple of days. It'll eventually dive south and come around the base of this trough. What that's going to mean is we're going to see a storm system heading east into the eastern United States, the Great Lakes here in the next few days. That's going to follow with cooler, drier weather. And then we return to a more active pattern as we get later into this weekend and beyond into next week. So right now, our hazards are limited to mainly the northwestern and north central states. The colorful colors here indicate winter storm warnings in pink. We have high wind advisories in the brown. We do have a winter storm watch here with our approaching system, and we do have advisories for winter weather as well over the UP of Michigan, the Dakotas, into parts of Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. And on the Gulf Coast, with all the moisture in place, and on the southeast coast, we still have dense fog advisories as we've been looking at some really nasty fog, especially on the Pontchartrain Causeway north of New Orleans, a major accident earlier today. So despite the fact that it's warm out, we are still dealing with fog even into the afternoon hours, and it'll get thicker as the night wears on tonight. Now, here's a look at what the temperatures are expected to be over the next few days. You see the cold lurking here in Canada, below 20, minus 20 here in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. That is heading south and east. And tomorrow, while it's very warm across the southeast, we start to turn colder by tomorrow night across parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin. And that cold does continue southward. As we get to Friday, we're looking at morning temperatures below freezing in places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, and 20s as well across the majority of New England, teens across the mountainous areas. And as we continue into the weekend, that cold air continues to dive southward here. We're starting the day Saturday with 30s in Atlanta and Birmingham, 20s in State College, where the big playoff game is going to be, 20s in South Bend as well. And look at how cold it is here once we get just north of the lakes, north of the U.S.-Canadian border, 20 to 30 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Brutal. Those of you on the West Coast not really participating in this cold, it slides mainly east of the Rockies and continues into Sunday and Monday across the eastern United States. But as we approach Christmas time, the cold is going to be leaving pretty quickly here, and we are back to above average temperatures in a hurry here by Christmas Day on Wednesday. Morning temperatures here in the 20s and 30s across New England. Sounds cold, but for those of you up there, it really isn't that bad. Above freezing around the Great Lakes, 70s in South Florida and on the Gulf Coast, 50s and 60s across the rest of the deep south. It will be cooler in the northwest, but not brutal. So Christmas afternoon and evening, most of the country will remain above freezing with the exception of northern New England and the Rockies, and mainly the northern and central Rockies. We're talking 70s and 80s across Texas and Florida, 60s across the Carolinas, 40s and 50s in the Appalachians, even mid to upper 50s in places like Omaha, Nebraska on Wednesday. So as much as we want that white Christmas, this is not going to be conducive to that. It's going to be more like a Torchmas than a Christmas. As we go into the latter part of next week and the end of the year here, you see the mild air holds on, but we are going to start to see another round of cold coming. And by January, we start to get into the thick of winter. And I'm going to talk about that here later in the video. Here's a look at the temperature differences we'll see in just a 24-hour stretch. 20 to 30 degrees colder in parts of Texas between Wednesday and Thursday. And that cold shifts into the Tennessee Valley, into the deep south here. Thursday morning, a good 20 degrees colder than Wednesday morning. But it is going to warm right back up here in the Dakotas. So that cold is fleeting. And as we get later into the week, you'll see the next round of cold comes down. And this one's going to be pretty abrupt as well here. Friday, much colder than Thursday in that same area. And then we warm right back up. Take a look at the rebound here as we get into next week. Temperatures in a 24-hour period warm up by as much as 20 degrees in places like St. Louis and 15 degrees in Champaign, Illinois. So that's the central states. In the east here, apologize for this little lag here. You can see it is definitely starting to turn cooler tomorrow, north and west of the Appalachians, and then Thursday for sure, a big drop in temperatures in the Carolinas. So our near record warmth today is going by the wayside by Thursday morning. And it'll be chilly into Friday, even into Saturday, but temperatures are going to start to rebound, but not just yet. There's kind of a second push of cool air coming down here for the start of the weekend. So Friday night, kind of a second push. And then as we get to Saturday night, it's still cold, but by Sunday, we start to see some improvement. And certainly next week, Monday into Tuesday, will turn abruptly warmer across the eastern United States. So let's take a look at what's to come here. This is the upper level pattern from the GFS. It's a zonal flow west to east across the country. This typically limits our chances for major winter weather, except north of the jet stream, also limits our chance for severe weather down south. Now, as we move on into the second portion of the week, we will see a series of troughs dropping south and east. This is going to put an end to that warm weather. The winds pick up. That allows much colder air to come in. So if you're planning on flying on Friday and you're heading from Minneapolis down to Atlanta, you will make good time based on this jet stream. And then that shifts. And then we have a bigger storm set to impact the West Coast over the weekend. And that is going to push inland and then weaken as it comes across. It runs into this big area of high pressure across the Gulf Coast and across Mexico. And so we warm right back up here, kind of a ridge that takes over here. There is a bit of a storm that comes through Wednesday, but then a bigger system moves into the western and southwestern states Tuesday night into Wednesday, so Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And as this rolls out into the plains, we do have to be mindful of the potential for some severe weather on Thursday and maybe into Friday right after Christmas time. So we're not probably yet looking at a major tornado outbreak, but something to keep in mind if you have travel plans. Your safety, of course, is important, so something to keep in mind here for the second portion of next week. Right after Christmas, we could have a bit of severe weather. But after that, despite the active weather pattern that we're in, we're not finished. There's another storm, and this one could be a major one for New Year's Eve into New Year's Day for the eastern states, hence the graphic that I showed you at the beginning of the video. So I'm going to break that down in a little bit. Here's the short-term NAM model. It actually should have an 18Z to show you here. Yep, here we go. And you can see here it's warmed up across New England and the Northeast, but a front moves through here tomorrow afternoon and it turns colder. So we'll see rain moving into Pennsylvania, but changing over to snow from west to east here as we get into the end of the day tomorrow. And then tomorrow evening, snow spreads into New England. Now at the coast, we're talking rain, just a moderate one for about 6 hours or so. And then that rolls into Atlantic Canada, and the system is basically gone Thursday. We do have some lake effect that lingers as the cold air rolls in here, but our real big shot of cold is not quite yet here. And so if we take a look at snow totals here just over the next 60 hours, you can see it's a moderate snowfall, just a few inches falling western New York, northwestern PA. Eventually it wraps around into the mountains of West Virginia and western Maryland. Most of our snow is going to be confined to the higher elevations, and it will come down hard there, perhaps a couple of feet of new snow over the green and white mountains here. So not really a wintry pattern for those of us that want to see that snow here in the big cities. Heading back into the Midwest, you're going to see this storm is going to roll out overnight tonight into parts of Wisconsin and northern Illinois. Not a big one, but it will pick up a little more energy as it crosses Lake Erie and Lakes Huron. And tomorrow afternoon, we see snow spreading across the eastern lakes. We see it spreading across much of Ontario and eventually spreading into Quebec. We could also see a few heavier storms over parts of southern Kentucky into middle Tennessee. There's a marginal risk for severe weather, but by the time it heads east Wednesday night, Thursday, it's not much of a system. There's going to be another piece that comes in behind it. That one could also produce some snowfall. It'll be too cold for anything but snow, it looks like, and that's kind of more of a clipper system here for Thursday night. Here's a look at snow accumulation. I'm sorry I didn't update that for you here, and you can see here a lighter snow for the most part. Generally an inch or two will fall. Then the next wave could actually bring a little bit more into the Twin Cities, and I did want to show that to you here. The Dakotas down into Minnesota, potentially 3 to 6 inches of accumulating snow. A little bit more probably does fall. And we see potentially the heaviest amounts here actually across areas to the west of, say, St. Cloud, Minnesota, and to the east of Sioux Falls and Sioux City, or northeast of Sioux City. So mainly a clipper here, but I know those of you in the Twin Cities will get excited about this because we haven't seen much snow. And here we are heading up almost to Christmas, and very little has actually fallen. So apologize for the tongue tie here. It's been a while since I've been on, and I need to get my mojo back here. But down south, marginal risk for some severe weather. We'll see a few heavier storms over parts of Arkansas. I know yesterday around this time we saw some nasty ones in North Texas around the Fort Worth, Dallas area. Nothing like that, I don't think, but we could have heavy rain into parts of Arkansas, western Tennessee overnight tonight. And then that front swings south and eastward here into Louisiana, Mississippi, and middle Tennessee tomorrow afternoon. And as it hits the mountains, it does fall apart. So we're not going to see a whole lot of rain east of the mountains. We'll see a little bit over the Carolinas. In the southeast, the majority of our rain is falling today on the east coast of Florida. We have seen storms around Fort Pierce and Vero Beach and the Cape, and even southward across South Florida. And that will lift away overnight tonight. But we could have a pretty significant amount of rain. And I'll zoom in to show this to you here across the east coast of Florida here. Take a look at this. This is going to be for tomorrow afternoon around lunchtime. And we see an area that may just sit there on the east coast, right on the Treasure Coast, starting in the morning, but getting worse as we get to lunchtime and eventually shearing out in the afternoon. So if you are in Florida, do be prepared for some heavier rain showers here, maybe some thunder and lightning, probably no severe weather. And then by tomorrow night, that is going to push its way back offshore. The Bahamas will get some of that, but Florida should dry out in time for Thursday. And then it turns colder after that. So here's where our severe weather risk is. It's very marginal. It's mainly this evening, northeast Texas, southeast Oklahoma, into west Tennessee. We do have that risk for thunderstorms as well over portions of central and south Florida. Tomorrow, we do also have a marginal risk over the majority of the volunteer state here, just east of Memphis, so Jackson, Tennessee, up to Nashville, over to Cookeville, and as far east as places like La Follette and Knoxville. And just to the north and west of Chattanooga, we do have that marginal risk, and we don't have a risk by the time we get into Thursday. So that's what we're looking at here. I did want to show you all the temperature anomalies that we're looking at here in the longer term. And you see the warmth gets wiped out. It gets colder. This will be one of our coldest air masses of the season by Saturday into Sunday in eastern Canada and in New England, and pretty darn chilly as well across the southeast. But look at the warmth that returns as temperatures shoot back up to 20 to 30 degrees above average in western Canada and in the western United States. And it will take a few days to get that warm air in here, but it is coming in time for Christmas Eve, and Christmas Day should be pretty warm. Thursday also could be pretty warm, and maybe even over the whole weekend here between Christmas and New Year's, we're above average in the east. But you'll see it does start to turn colder by the beginning of the new year. Here's a look at the GFS model from earlier. We see our storm system moving across the east. Low pressure forms over New England, heads out to sea, and we see rain going over to a little bit of snow. Here's the next Clipper system. This is the one that brings the cold down with it. And you see this big area of high pressure over 1,040 millibars. That's a cold air mass, and that's set to shoot south and eastward here for the weekend and gets reinforced, by the way. But you can see because of how dry the air mass is, we're not talking a whole lot of lake effect over the weekend. Despite the cold, we may actually have clear skies in places like Buffalo and Syracuse and other areas that have been getting crushed with lake effect. So this could form low pressure off the coast. I know I talked about it before I left last week, maybe an East Coast storm. It's going to head out at this point, so I don't think we're talking anything significant. But then here comes our next one, moving on shore here at the beginning of next week into the west. And another push that looks more significant on Tuesday. That's what we're tracking as we get to New Year's Eve. Now, we are going to see things out ahead of that again. Here's Christmas Day, and not a lot of wintry weather, but maybe a little bit of an icy mix, maybe a bit of snow across the interior parts of New England and even northern Pennsylvania, but really not expecting much snow on Christmas Day if this is correct. We will see some heavier rain, though, setting up on the central and eastern Gulf Coast. And then as we get into Thursday night and Friday, you can see things could get more active in Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Arkansas, right on into Friday here. And then our next system follows this rainmaker here, and this one has the potential to be a more significant storm. And this is the one I've got highlighted on my title, the holiday storm. Well, New Year's Eve, maybe New Year's Day here, a potentially substantial system moving through the east. This one reminds me a little bit of what we had at the end of last week, or I should say last Wednesday and into Thursday. but the track could be a little bit different. So that could follow with more persistent cold. We're going to talk about that in future videos. Here's the European model, by the way, which is starting to come in now. And a little bit different on timing, but you can see it's got the same idea here. Cold settles into the south and east. Then we warm up gradually early next week. It gets wet by Christmas Day, maybe a little bit of slop to begin the day before it goes to rain. And then we start to get more active later next week into the following weekend. And then heading into New Year's Eve, you can see a little bit different on the exact storm, but it is coming and it's following with much colder air. And the East Coast certainly could be open for business as well. Here's the AI from the European, more in agreement with the GFS that I just showed you here. It's got this storm leaving the East Coast Friday night and Saturday, then the cold. Then we get a break, and then moisture returns for the middle of next week for Christmas Day. And then we see more active weather across the south late next week and across the west over the weekend. And then across the eastern United States, things get pretty active here again for the first half of the following week. And this is New Year's Eve, potentially significant snowstorm from Kansas up to northern Michigan, potentially some severe weather and heavy rain down south. And this heads to the East Coast for New Year's Eve. And this could be pretty bad in Times Square if correct. And again, models that are this far out aren't always going to be correct. In fact, they're often more wrong than not, but they do show a more substantial storm. And finally, if we look at the control of the European ensemble, we see things are mostly swinging and missing in the eastern United States here right on into next week. And then you can see how things are going to get more unsettled starting in the west next weekend and then shifting over to the eastern U.S. This is New Year's Eve, and it is showing potentially a substantial storm on the East Coast. So the models are hinting at something big here. We don't know exactly how that plays out just yet, but we know there's something coming. And the bigger story is going to be that it gets more colder more persistently here as we head, especially towards the second week of January and beyond. Definitely a colder look coming here. You see this big area of high pressure here. When the pressures are lowering in Alaska, that typically means it's milder in Alaska, and that cold is allowed to come down into the United States. So I think we're going to see more active weather in January, and our longer range models do indicate that as well. Here's the cold this weekend. It's pretty fleeting. Then look how warm it is through about New Year's. And then take a look at this. We're getting back to colder for the first weekend of January and beyond, perhaps significantly colder. But again, this is just an average. It's a 7-day forecast. So it doesn't mean that we're going to be freezing cold on the 15th. It means one day could be a lot worse than another, but it does show more substantial cold coming. And this could set up a more active setup as well for winter weather. And you can see that here, our snow forecast. And again, take this with a grain of salt, but just an idea of where snow could fall. We're not yet in the big cities here. In fact, I don't think we are before New Year's. In fact, you see the snow cover actually drops. And then we start to see more snow cover returning at the beginning of January to the Northeast, to the Great Lakes, maybe even the Mid-South through the first 10 days of January. Now, I'm not promising it to you in Atlanta or Columbia or Raleigh, but you can see things are inching farther south here. So our chances are starting to come up a little bit here for snow heading into the middle of January. And then after that, I mean, this is a month away, so a lot could change. But you see the pattern definitely changes as much colder air drives south. We're going to have moist weather coming in from the west. And so I think things are going to start ramping up in this area here after a pretty relatively quiet start to the winter season here. And I'd like to show you the teleconnections. This is a scientific graph that kind of gives you an idea of where the cold is. Arctic oscillation, when that's positive, we tend to have milder overall weather on this side of the globe. When it's negative, the colder air comes across the North Pole. So you can see we're mostly neutral to positive until we get past the new year. Taking a look at the Eastern Pacific oscillation, when that is negative, we see the active weather on the West Coast begin to shut down as it heads into a more positive phase. And then it means colder weather in the East when it's negative. So you can see here around Christmas time, this is not the setup for a cold and stormy pattern across the East or the Southern United States. But there's promise in the longer range once we get to the new year as that becomes a lot more favorable. And the NAO, which can sometimes show us where the chances for winter weather in the Eastern United States are a little bit better. Well, it's actually positive now, which is what you would want for that wintry weather. And then it goes more towards negative. So we don't get things really lining up just yet until we get past the new year. So the PNA, when that's, or I should say the PNA is what we're actually talking about. When the PNA is positive, we do have a better chance of seeing colder air coming into the southeast, but it doesn't line up with everything else. And as long as the NAO is positive, it's not favorable to see a big storm in the east. When it starts going negative And when the P&A goes positive, things could get more interesting. And that doesn't happen until the beginning of the new year. So that's all I got for you all. But I hope everybody has a wonderful Tuesday night. And I'll be back tomorrow. And as always, I thank you for your time. I want to give all the honor and glory to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. From 2 Corinthians 12:9. Each time he said, "My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weakness so that the power of Christ can work through me." And that's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the results, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I'm made strong. And that is all you really need to know. If you are a believer, it's that God extends his grace and his power works best when you are weakest. We're all going through a weak time right now. Life is difficult, but it's worth it, because in the end, if you believe in Jesus, you will be saved. And that is the good news I wanted to share with you today. I'll see you all tomorrow. Have a wonderful night.